Glad I can count. All right, so welcome everybody. Thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedules to spend the next hour talking about different aspects in the beer industry. I'm very, very excited to have such a fabulous panel of individuals and bringing their different perspectives on what's going on in the industry. Obviously, the industry has vastly changed, as no different than any other industry due to COVID. Now that things are opening back up, things are getting back to what some refer to as normal or the new normal, however you want to phrase it. There has been shifts and change within the aspects of the beer industry. You know, you want to consider the impact of COVID had the biggest change within the beer, the beverage, and even the restaurant community since Prohibition. Never has there been such a great upheaval or impact on the industry going back to Prohibition. So I'm very, very excited to discuss on different ways the industry is opening up and the changes. I have such a great panel. And my name, again, is Doug Miller. I am a lecturer at the hotel school at the S.C. Johnson College of Business at Cornell University, hailing in Ithaca, New York. I have Sarah Jane Curran coming in from Washington, D.C. She does beverage manager, global operations for Marriott International and IMI Agency. And joining us from one of the many wonderful breweries in Maine, she is a marketing communications manager for Maine Brewing Company in Freeport, Maine, and then Ari Saunders, director of tavern operations, Full Steam Brewery, hailing from Durham, North Carolina. If you do have questions, you do have the ability to add questions, and we'll try to filter them in and go through the questions that you might have. You can put those in the chat, but please feel free to ask questions. And I just want to start off to toss out an opening question to the group. Now that restaurants, bars, tap rooms, brew pubs, restaurants, hotels, fill in the blank, are opening back up, have you noticed what are the changes? What are the differences? And I'll start with you, Ari. What are some of the changes that you've experienced in your operation pre versus now, we'll just say post-pandemic? Even though technically it hasn't ended, but we'll leave it at that.
I think one of the biggest differences for our customers in particular is that they're a little out of practice. I said to myself, I kind of went feral during COVID. I think some of our guests did as well. Folk come in, they have just forgotten how it's done. And then there's also, folk who just turned 21 right at the end of 2019. We have a whole generation of people who turned 21 inside of COVID. So we have pretty much 2 years of people, thus being near Duke University, near NCCU, who these humans really haven't been out before. And so just trying to navigate those folk who are kind of A, out of practice, and B, deer in headlights, or C, very inexperienced with bar and restaurant. And how do you order a drink? What does ABV mean? We're getting some really interesting questions from these folk who are just doing it really for their first time or their first time in 18 months. So just that kind of deer in headlights kind of thing. And I do notice people seem to be coming in. I'm getting more larger groups. Lots of friends are meeting back up for the first time and using our space because we have, traditional German kind of style seating. And they seem to be staying a little bit longer. Our POS doesn't give us the best data about how long a check is open, but experientially and just by my table turns on volume, I'm seeing that people's visits seem to be a bit longer. They're really enjoying just being back together in groups.
And Ann, what have you noticed? Any differences from pre and post? Do you see some of the similarities?
Definitely. I think people are really valuing their experience out. We're seeing, in Maine, we are vacation land, so we have a lot of people who are coming here to visit. And I think it's an attractive place for out-of-staters to visit because our vaccination rate is so high, but also we're very focused on the outdoors, so they feel comfortable coming here. So we see a lot of people from out of town visiting. I think people are just, every once in a while you get a bad one, but it's such a minimal thing. I think overall people are really excited to be out and very appreciative of the experience. We've gotten just very, very positive feedback from folks about how we handle things, the pace that we took in, getting back to normal, whatever that is at this point. So I think, people really, there's a greater appreciation, I think, for some restaurants and bar spaces, and that's exciting to see.
Sarah Jane, you have workings throughout the country. What have you noticed? What do you see? What are the tea leaves telling you?
Well, it's really fascinating to see the guest behavior really differ depending on what experience they had during the pandemic. So, for example, there are certain states that had a lot less restrictions. And because of that, there wasn't a lot of adjustment required on the guest side. So as things are loosening up or reopening, their experience hasn't really morphed at all. So the mindset, there's nothing to adjust to. Whereas when you have a state that had a lot of restrictions, there's a lot that the guest has to adjust to. I've seen, specifically in Washington, D.C., it really does depend on the establishment. A lot of establishments kind of went different routes. Some had QR menus, but you're still ordering from a server. Some had you're purely ordering from an app. Some had, only grab and go. So now that these different establishments are kind of going in different directions and, getting back to normal in different ways, you have guests that are kind of having to bob and weave depending on the establishment that they're in. So I think it's just a lot of confusion, and I think a lot of guests are kind of experiencing this, pandemic fatigue. And I feel like at some point the patience, especially for those who've had to experience really tight constraints, I feel like that's going to start to burst. I feel like that patience and that grace that you are experiencing from your guests is really going to start to wane.
And I'd also ask, I think part of it also depends on, are you a tap room or a restaurant or bar in an urban setting where space is a premium versus are you sitting like up in Maine where there's just naturally more space for people to hang out. I was at a brewery yesterday, and there's plenty of space for people to hang out. By default, it was social distancing because they had the room just to space out. And going along with that, Sarah Jane, we've seen a lot of changes. We've seen plexiglass and spacing and other things. What are some of the things you think will be permanent within the beer industry, practices that people adopted during the pandemic?
You had even given us a heads up on this question, and it's something that I've really kind of wrestled with, because I think in some ways, like, technology obviously plays such a huge role, right? There was such a huge adoption of the QR codes. I know kind of at the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of self-serve mechanisms were starting to grow in popularity, and they were starting to get more and more popular, like even in like hotel settings and less like boutique settings. And then there was kind of a halt on that because everyone was scared of, going up and using something themselves and then having to go back and like sanitize that space. Then as we learned more about COVID and what was important, it was less about surfaces, more about airborne. And so, self-service kind of came back to an okay thing, but I still feel like there's still a stigma. So I feel like technology is going to play a huge role, but I think even in the tiny things, people are forever changed. All of us here are in the industry. So we know that there's the sanitation bucket that gets used to wipe down the table after each guest. And back in the day, that sanitation bucket didn't get changed for an 8-hour shift. Like, we're just going to be honest in this panel. But I think people are starting to notice cleanliness practices and really starting to question, what's okay and what's not okay. So I've seen people switch to like single-use sanitation wipes as opposed to that bucket. And like just little things like that are starting to be questioned.
And there has been reports out there, people who want to spend the money, they want to be in an environment that they feel safe, particularly when it comes around this. And prior to this, and we're talking about your reservations, utilizing a program for reservations. How has that impacted your operation?
It's been huge. We didn't have a reservation system before. It was just sort of first come, first serve, and especially during our busy season, it's a madhouse in here because there's no pacing to things. As anyone who works in restaurants knows, how important pacing is, how many people seat at a certain time, because that enables you to provide the best service possible. The more you're able to get to people quickly, get their orders in. So we instituted a reservation system mainly to help us control the capacity because we were under capacity restrictions, and that was the only way we could kind of really control that. And we found after a while it paced everything in the space very well. Our kitchen was, producing more pizzas than they ever had before. Guests were having a better experience. Some of it, is definitely, there's something to be said about being able to walk in, grab a beer, and we still have that as an option. But I think a lot of people, especially through the pandemic, as you were planning more and more, if you were going out, this was an ordeal. You planned a week in advance and you had this set up. And so to be able to go in, to know you had a reservation, you had a good amount of time, and you were able to sit back and relax and enjoy your beer, enjoy the company you were in. You were in a space that you felt comfortable in. That was huge. And I think people really appreciated that. And for us, our focus has always been, that's how we want people to enjoy our beers. We want them to, not be rushing through it, to just, not be in front of screens, to just sit and enjoy each other's company, enjoy the beer they're drinking, thinking about it a little bit. And that's what seems to happen. And we like the system, and they're going to keep it going forward.
And I saw you nodding your head. What else do you have to add about this, about some of the things that you see in your operation that you're going to continue to do?
Well, I think one thing that really happened, I was always kind of a bar customer who I had days I want to socialize and days that I don't. But a lot of our customers seem to really enjoy just walking in, starting their tab, grabbing their menu. They walk up to the bar, they're ready, and they're gone. Versus standing really close to someone else across the bar, kind of like waiting for their turn, jockeying for the bartender's attention. I think people really like I know when it's my turn, I know that I'm next. No one's jumping ahead of me. And then if you happen to be seated at a bar with a place with bar seating, most places are still queuing up customers with a small amount of bar seating. You're now able to sit and talk with your friend without someone reaching over you or being closer in your space. And I think people are really going to want to continue that experience. I do think that crowded, jostling bar is a thing of the past outside the nightclub setting, because especially as the craft beer grows, especially as more of us move back to a brew pub model, people are looking for these elevated experiences. Going back to what Anne said about people making it a night out and wanting to spend their money somewhere they feel safe and welcome, that's also having your personal space. I think that personal space became very important to people. I think a lot of people found how much they liked it versus the old school bar experience of the jostling and jockeying. So I think that a lot of that contactless will stay, and I think a lot of people also expect to have more space at the bar and expect to queue in lines.
It will be interesting how that'll break down generational too. I think there are a lot of individuals like, wow, it's kind of nice to have space and room, and I could actually hear the person I'm talking to, versus, as you say, nightclubs, completely different settings. So it'll be interesting to see that. The other thing it'll be interesting to see is the whole QR ordering thing. I don't know, Sarah, Jane, I still haven't settled on that.
The thing is there's a big difference between QR ordering and like QR as a menu.
Correct.
Because like QR as a menu, I think people are getting sick of, because if you're looking at your phone and you have to scroll through, especially if you're at a restaurant or a tap room with a ton of selections and you're literally like scrolling, and then someone comes by and takes your order. But I think it's an entirely different experience to go to a tap room and pull up the menu real quick and literally click and pay, and your tasters just show up. So I think there's a big distinction between those two experiences.
I agree with you, Sarah. I actually had an experience yesterday. I was in a pretty big hurry. I was grabbing a really quick lunch, really quick beer, and I couldn't get the menu to load. So my servers come, I know exactly what beer I want. When I was able to find the menu, it wasn't updated properly. And it was like this, she finally goes, I can just get you a paper menu. And I'm like, thank you so much. But there's a very real difference between, I can order right here and my things just arrive. Like, I personally love that experience. It gives me more time with my friends. It gives me fewer interruptions. You know, there's a lot of great servers out there who really understand when you want to talk and when you don't. And then there's some that don't. And just having things just kind of show up on my whim. I don't have to get up. I don't really have to change what's going on at my table to have more things come to me. I think it's going to be a real bonus for us, particularly with the labor shortages we're facing in food and beverage right now.
Anything else to add, Anne?
I was going to say, I think one of the interesting things, and something that I wouldn't have expected to come out of the QR codes, was it gave us a question of accessibility. Because we hadn't really used QR codes for anything before. And then we were like, well, maybe this would be better. We aren't wasting paper. And someone's like, well, we should always have them for guests who, you know, need a different way of accessing our menu. And I was like, oh, I never thought of that before. And it led to a much larger conversation with another member of our staff about our website, our social media, just different things that we do in-house that provide accessibility for someone who is, doesn't have vision, someone who is hearing impaired. And it, has definitely changed some of the things that we're doing in-house to be just more cognizant of the different ways people are accessing all of our space.
The only fear and I caution establishments about this is not using those codes as creating a lack of hospitality experience. I know one place who wanted to walk up and order because she doesn't believe in apps, which is fair. That's fine. It's actually probably a good thing. And they wouldn't take an order. And they kept saying, no, you have to download the app to place an order. It's like, here's my cash. Take it. And that's the only thing I caution the industry is don't let it surpass hospitality, and use that as a leveraging tool to enhance it, opposed to hurting that guest experience. There's a couple questions out of the chat. One of them has any of you seen a shift in guest preferences, packaged versus draft beer? Draft beer on tap. Took a huge hit, obviously, when bars and restaurants closed down. We shifted to a package world. We shifted on where we're buying beer. Are you starting to see that shift back from packaged back to the draft, people consuming beer in draft? And I know you mentioned something about that.
Yeah, we had, I would say, pre-pandemic, draft was the bulk of our business, hands down. And luckily, we were able to flex pretty quickly and shift a lot of our production to packaging to meet that need. And we saw package grow just exponentially throughout last year. It is starting to even back out again, but we are still seeing a much higher demand for package than we had seen before. And I think a lot of that is, just changing preferences for people. They've realized they enjoy hanging out at home and, having a beer, or picking up beer on their way to camp or a lake, or, whatever they're doing. And so I think that's become an important part of how people experience our product.
And what we mean by packaged beer, that'd be beer in cans and bottles versus getting a beer on tap. And all right, have you seen a shift in your operation on what guests are doing?
It's actually pretty similar to what Anne's experiencing. We saw this huge packaging uptick, both in our distribution and, just people coming in buying beer by the case early in the pandemic. We've noticed we're still selling a lot more package in our menu mix is still kind of off. It is selling back out, but I do think people are definitely grabbing beer to go and drinking at home a lot more. I have a lot of friends in the bottle shop industry, and some of them reported record sales over the pandemic because people were coming in, getting their mixed 24-pack for the week. We're still seeing just disproportionate packaged beer to draft beer right now. We finally got our bars and restaurants back in North Carolina. But I think people did kind of change their habits. I think people stocked their liquor cabinet. People got used to cooking at home. A lot of people realized, I don't want to try to find parking. I'm just going to have my friends over. So I think that package and that kind of way of experiencing our products is going to be there for a while. I think people are reconnecting with our brands and bringing them into their homes.
Yes, the whole increase in people baking bread, all those poor sourdough starters that people created are now withering away in the back of the refrigerator. Sarah Jane, what have you seen as far as packaged or draft, tap, etc.?
Yeah, packaged products definitely had their moment in the sun. There was a huge demand. It was also exciting to see how creative different properties were getting as far as, increasing the selection in like grab and go markets, creating fun experiences for in-room dining, because for a while in-room dining was the only option. And also to see, some of the breweries get creative with like different experiences where, the can of beer would come with a coaster and you could scan that coaster, and the beer, the brewer or somebody would, kind of give a little spiel about the beer. And so you're still kind of getting an experience. But yeah, everything was packaged. Even cocktails, ready to drink cocktails are just, off the charts right now. So even outside of beer, on a funny note, I'm still waiting for Maine Beer Company to just commit and come out with Camelback, packaging. Just put the beer directly in Camelbacks. Just go for it.
Make it easier.
Not good for quality.
I know. It's a joke.
If I can hike 8 miles with 2 bottles of beer just so I can get some good pictures, you can do it too.
I know.
Empty them at the top.
Yeah.
It is interesting now that we're starting to see a shift, like New York State announced that no longer to-go cocktails will be allowed starting today. That announcement came out yesterday. Mm-hmm. But some states have kept the to-go sales of mixed drinks and beer and other things in place. And they'll be interested to see how that comes into the mix too on people's preferences. Is the dinner party back? In the 1970s, everybody did progressive dinner parties. Will that come back, and will people do progressive beer dinner parties? Which might be an interesting thing. Another question for you, Sarah Jane, is out of the chat: sustainability, sanitation, to-go silverware, balancing out from what we used to do with glassware, now plastic and silverware. How do people work through that?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'd happily take that on. So Full Steam has always been very, very around farm and agriculture. So composting was very natural for us. So immediately we switched over to compostable silverware for our to-go as well. We were already using it for to-go. So now we're just we're still on compostables. So compostable plates, compostable ramekins, everything in sight for us is compostable. And we do have commercial compost. Our compost has gone crazy, of course. And I think we've even got compostable bags. And I think our customers appreciate it. But one thing about this pandemic, we've lost a lot of ground on going green. You see disposable masks everywhere. We provided reusable masks for our staff members in hopes of cutting back on those one-use masks. But I think sustainability is going to be really important, and also just being careful about the chemicals we use to sanitize. I almost fell into the trap of the single-use sanitation wipes, but we were like, no, we're not going to do this. And so we found some some natural cleaners that we're using, and we're just sticking with multi-quat and just keeping it nice and at temp and checking that pH all the time, because, you know, we can't lose sight of our bigger goal as well, getting through the pandemic as well as addressing the climate change. It's important to us as a brand.
Same here. We, very much like Full Steam, our company has a huge focus on the environment and taking care of it. And, it was just it was a huge dilemma last year because, initially everything was very focused on touch and, surfaces. So we've always used compostable, but it was just really hard seeing, even though things are compostable, seeing it pile up in a compost bin it's still not going anywhere for a bit. So it's better than trash, but not as much as we want it to be. So as kind of our understanding of the virus and sanitation changed, we moved back towards, silverware, plates, because we're using a high temp dishwasher for things, our glassware and everything. And it's been good. And we've been trying to move away from any single use items as much as possible, but we're seeing it in the state of Maine. We had made all these advances with our governor in terms of environmental impact things that we were going to do. And one of the big things was getting rid of single-use plastic bags at stores and grocery stores, et cetera, throughout the state. And last year that just went, and it is coming back. So starting July 1st, no single-use plastic bags, which we're like, yes. But it's, like Ari said, it's a tough battle, but something that we really need to pay attention to.
And this kind of ties in one of the questions I had. I mean, both your breweries, Maine and also Full Steam, you do a lot of things for the local community, from an agricultural standpoint to different nonprofit causes. These don't always directly yield in financial benefits. And I have a sense that part of the culture of the operations is trying to be part of the community. Why is it important for breweries to be part of the community, and at multiple different levels, either direct or indirect, different ways? And why is it an important part of Maine Beer Company to be a part of the community?
So from day one of Daniel and David Kleban starting this company, their motto has been "Do what's right," and it seriously guides almost every decision that we make. And your community it's who you are. It's, these are the people who are supporting you. Our community here in Freeport was crucial to surviving this pandemic. We saw so many people coming in, supporting us, supporting the things that we do. And it was great because they felt we were doing the same for them. We started offering, when our tasting room was closed, we started offering, based on things that we were able to get for our kitchen, like yeast, flour, stuff that was hard to come by, coffee. We started offering these things as to-go items, and a number of our neighbors have said, wow, that was huge. We couldn't get these things at any of the grocery store, and it was so nice having that as an option. So that's a kind of extreme example, but day to day, these are the people who support you. These are the people who, are going to be your biggest champions, and it's crucial to support them and, give back. In your question, it was, it doesn't yield the larger market share. We think it does. Dan and Dave set out to prove that taking care of your people, be it your staff and your community, taking care of the environment, those things aren't mutually exclusive to succeeding as a company. And we truly believe that if you put those things first, success is going to follow.
Now, you have a beer that's like all North Carolina. That's incredible. That's like, who would have thought 10 years ago that we'd have these systems in place where you could do like exclusive beers from places that are not known for grain production, et cetera. How is that playing into the overall mindset of the operation?
So one thing about Full Steam in particular, our mission as a company is to create distinctly Southern beer that celebrates farm and food of the American South. So for us, Full Steam beer is about the Southern beer economy. It is about local ingredients. It is about farming. It is about foraging. It's about pawpaws. It's about persimmons. It's about those things of the beautiful South and the progressive South that bring us all together in Southern history, as well as the Southern food tradition, which we try to show in our kitchen. So another part of that being local and going back to our community, like farm communities, if their neighbor's hurting, you help them build their barn. You help them take in their hay. If someone's sick, you help them plow their field. And so for us, being a part of our community, making the contributions we do, showing up when we can for who we can, is about being a good Southerner, right? We're about community, we're about neighborhood. And one thing that we have to talk about in the beer industry as well, you know, due to zoning, a lot of times our breweries pop up in neighborhoods that aren't the prettiest neighborhoods. So we move into these existing communities, and guess what? If you get a craft brewery in your neighborhood, you're gentrifying real hard in about 5 years. And so it's very important as we see our neighborhood change, partly because Full Steam got down here and people are like, that's a weird part of town. Now it's a beautiful part of town. They're putting in, you know, $500,000 condos. And so for us, it's important as being a part of this gentrification to be here for our neighbors who were here before we were. A lot of breweries move into a community and try to bring the community they want with them versus serving the communities they're actually a part of. And that seems like it doesn't speak truth to beauty. And that's one of the things Full Steam is about.
And Pow Pows, I have 3 Pow Pow trees. Hopefully in 10 years I'll get fruit. But Pow Pow is one of the, arguably the only tropical tasting like fruits in North America, indigenous to North America, utilized a lot with indigenous individuals. Problem is it doesn't have a long shelf life. So if you ever have the chance to try Pow Pow, try it. It's really, really creamy and delicious. It's just hard to come by. And it's a slow growing tree. So hopefully in 10 years I'll pop out.
When you make that visit to North Carolina, you got to get in town and try some American Promise. It's a hazy IPA with locally foraged pawpaws. It's fantastic.
Amazing.
That's a bet. And Sarah Jane, your thoughts on all of this?
So something that I agree wholeheartedly that breweries should be stewards of the community. And, you know, it is really important to celebrate the community that you have and not try to drag in something else. Because generally where you exist is beautiful on its own. And from a buyer standpoint, these kinds of stories are so crucial. Not only for building out a list, but also for actually making that guest experience. You know, it's one thing just to say like, oh, this is an IPA and it has these like really rare hops and that's cool. It's an entirely other thing to say, you know, this brewery does XYZ for the environment, or this brewery funded this whole new nonprofit, or this brewery does this for their community. You're able to tell a story, you're able to build on that guest experience. And, you know, looping back to our tech conversation, when you're taking out a lot of the server's interaction, these are the moments where you can still build that experience. When you're dropping off that beer and you say, hey, great choice, I love this brewery because XYZ, you've just made that experience. So it's able to pull through entirely from, you know, the moment it's made to the moment it's consumed.
And this kind of ties into one of the questions for you, and that's in the chat. And it's saying how they feel marketing. Has marketing changed? Do you think marketing is going to change pre and post pandemic world? How do you think that's going to impact marketing?
Well, I think one of the things that was interesting was we had, you know, not that social media wasn't already huge, but we had a year where people were so very focused on their phones and very aware of marketing and very aware of messages. And, you know, for for people who, do my job and are in marketing and social media, being honest, being straightforward, telling your story, letting people know it, truths about your business was really important in terms of making people feel comfortable with you and happy with what you were doing. I remember, just the scariness of saying, okay, we have a staff member who has COVID. What are we going to do? How are we going to react? And then, there are some models where people were like, oh, we're closing for repairs. It's like, no, be straight with people. Let people know, like, we had a staff member. We feel that, everybody's been notified properly. We are closing for this number of days to ensure that there is no further spread, and here are the steps we're taking. And that got a lot of positive response. But, beyond that, we spent a year where there were a lot of social issues that were really highlighted so much more. And, marketing and social media was a way of talking about them, sometimes successfully, sometimes not so. But I think those conversations are now a much bigger part of, everything that we're doing in the restaurant, bar, and beer industry. And that's a positive thing.
And that's why, like, there's a lot of people to tie on to that. I know a brewery in Pennsylvania, Pickerman Valley Brewery, who created their small little place for, they have children on the spectrum, and they wanted to create a brewery that's inviting to them on the spectrum. They have people like Plants and Panels doing some great work, Dr. Jackson Beckham, Julia Hers, all these individuals. How do we make craft beer for all? Like, how do we create in spaces where everybody feels welcomed? If they want an IPA, fine. If they want a sour, fine. No matter their gender identity or their background, nationality, how do you move towards that place where we create an environment where truly beer is for everybody and everybody feels welcome? Any thoughts on that, Ari, on moving to that space?
So one thing that Full Steam has done in the past, and we're also continuing to do this work, is, we have a diversity committee. And one of the things we did pre-pandemic was, how do people know they're welcome? Well, you're welcome with representation. One thing that, we've gotten a lot of good attention via social media, because we do have staff members who are, I would venture to say, I might have the most diverse staff in the Triangle. Gender identity, ethnic background, ability in general. And I think it's just important to live it. Right? You can't just put an ad up or just call your friends who look like you and say, I'm looking for someone to tend bar. You have to go and find people where they are to bring them into your space, because representation matters. We've already, we made our restrooms pretty much gender neutral. We let people know, hey, this one's got stalls only. This one has urinals and stalls. Do your thing. You can figure out the bathroom for yourself. We do have to be careful about not overly virtue signaling, but we're living our staff. We let our staff express ourselves. We try to be very open to staff suggestions. And one thing about Full Steam, going back to the South has a interesting relationship with agriculture. The elephant in the room. Southern farms were often manned by people who were slave laborers, who were people of color. And so an important thing that Full Steam also has done is intentionally look for African-American farmers to source our ingredients from, because how you pay homage, one of the great ways to do it is commerce, because giving commerce shows respect as well. So we try to actively work with vendors of color. We try to actively work with female and minority-owned businesses. And we try to have very equitable hiring practices that invites people of different backgrounds to come work alongside us at Full Steam.
And Sarah Jane, you've worked not only in Washington, D.C., you're in New York City for a while, you've been in the beer industry for a few years, we'll leave it at that. How do we move to that, like, where everybody feels welcome to walk in an establishment and just have a beer?
So I feel like there's multiple parts to the equation. I think one thing is to look at the physical space and really see, how inviting your actual space is. For example, like a brewery that does a fantastic job at this is Black Narrows Brewing Company in Chincoteague, Virginia. The space is created, it's very open, it's very bright. The music is, always happy, but the key thing that I really zeroed in on was in the bathrooms, which are gender neutral. They have everything you could possibly need as a parent dealing with a child. Like there's a cart with like diapers, wipes, like everything that you could possibly need, because they specifically wanted to create a space where anyone can bring their child and feel comfortable and hang out. And what you end up with is, a space that's packed with families and people of all different ages, and it creates more of that community. So the physical space is really important. I think also staff education and honest conversations with your staff. There's a fantastic organization that started here in DC called Safe Bars. And what they do is they provide training for staff and management. It started off as training to recognize and de-escalate sexual harassment. So kind of seeing what that looks like and helping your patrons feel safe. But they've expanded the training to include kind of general de-escalation. It's not an easy process to go through. You're having hard conversations, but it's something that I think is really vital. Continuing education for your staff. Even if you've got servers who roll their eyes and say, I've been a server for 10 years, I know what I'm doing, kind of continuing to better yourself and be aware of what's going on. And then the third part is looping back to community, making sure that you are a steward of your community and you are, cognizant of how you're impacting your surroundings. So space, staff, community.
And obviously, we could spend a whole hour just talking about this, because the beer industry is a very long history and has not always been welcoming to different types of communities. And it's unfortunate because, one person asked in the chat about more strategies to increase customer base and revenue. One of the things I would say is creating an environment where everybody feels welcome to spend their money. Your banker doesn't say who spent the money. All the banker cares is that you're putting a deposit to pay the loan or whatever it may be. So I think doing different types of steps to everybody feel relaxed and comfortable. And I'll also say, add to this too, is invite people who don't like to drink beer, don't know a lot about beer. We're putting up I'm all for scores and ratings and all of that stuff, but that also creates a barrier for people who have who don't understand the terminology and lingo, don't care about the scores. They just want a beer, right? So how do we create an environment too where people low level of beer knowledge still feel welcomed and not like, oh, I can't go there because I can't speak what the language is. And I mean, your brewing is very well renowned, very well known in the industry. How do you still create that environment where that person who knows nothing about beer, it still feels welcome?
I think one of the things that's really important, and this is kind of jumping off the last conversation, is laying out your values from the start and staying true to them. Be consistent in how you behave, what your policies are, how you explain those to your staff, and how you live up to them. As it's an always changing thing, but knowing that you're growing and you're always improving, I think is important. But I think it's just so crucial. We always get, especially in marketing, you get the question of what's your demographic. I don't want to sound cliche, but get rid of demographics. Technically, if we go by what our demographic should be, I've aged out of our demographic. I'm too old to drink our beer. And it's that's not what we want. I love that you can walk into our tasting room and you see families of different ages. You see older couples, you see younger kids, and it's really a wide range. And people just seem, you're not walking into a place where there's a kind of stigma, where it's like, oh, I feel like I'm not dressed cool enough, or I'm not tattooed enough, or it's getting that person right when they walk in the door and saying, hey, how's it going? Thanks for coming, goes such a long way. And, that seems very, very simple, but when you're greeted like that, when you walk in, it's just like, yes, and training your staff to really engage with people. If you hear someone say, I've never heard of a cream ale before, boom, jump on that. That's your time to explain it. And don't do it in a condescending way. Doing it in a way that's excited and sharing. I mean, that's the condescension has no place in this business. Yeah, you probably know more about beer than the most of the people walking in, but that's your job to share. That's your, exciting opportunity to explain and turn someone on to something they might have never thought they wanted to drink.
And that's why people go ahead,
sorry, Doug. To build off that point with Anne, being cognizant of the language you're using. So when you're explaining a beer to a person and you say, oh, it's really hoppy, don't assume people know what hoppy means. Give it something for them to relate to. Be like, oh, do you like these herbs? Do you like this kind of citrus? Like, give them something tangible. But yeah.
I found as part of my interviewing, I try to hire curious people, because when people are curious, they're going to go and get information. And then they often respect curiosity in other people, and they love to share what they've learned. So when we release new beers, our awesome head brewer, she comes into our tavern all the time, talks about the beer. We do a lot of, company threads and things of that nature, but there's nothing like grabbing a glass and talking about it. We do our 1 ounce sample when new beers come out, and I'm a beer nerd. I nerd out. All my kids are reading, tasting beer, but curious people are very great educators. So if you can hire a curious staff, because they respect curiosity in other people, and when they go out and get knowledge, they're always enthusiastic to share it.
Yeah. And that's why when people ask me, oh, what's your favorite beer, or what should I be drinking? My question back to is, what do you like to drink? Doesn't matter what I like to drink. What do you like to drink, and what flavor profiles? And if you don't, and I'll say it, if you don't like IPAs, that's okay. Drink something else. I know a lot of people feel they have to drink IPAs, particularly hazy IPAs, because that's the hot trend. If you don't like them, find something else. That is okay. It's our own personal preference and histories and backgrounds to drive what we think. Just a couple other questions as we're winding down. We have about 12 minutes left. This also kind of ties into guests asking about educating the consumer. Is that one of your strategies are also about hiring curious people that helps them educate the consumer? How do you do that?
Absolutely. One thing that's also great, our marketing department does a fantastic job of writing the stories of the beers, but I have a staff that likes talking to people about beer and sharing their knowledge, and they've made friends. I've seen them making new beer drinkers every day. One of the things that grinds my gears is how we use the word IPA. IPA is, straightforward Centennial hop, or we've got these hazy juice bombs. How can you expect a layman to understand that nuance, right? So be warm. One of our values is be kind. One of our values is listen with empathy. Be kind and empathetic. It's confusing. I'm still learning every single day. There's no expert out there. There's no one that knows it all. So of course, Avery that came in off the street might have some questions. Welcome them, because how you treat that person in the moment with kindness and empathy is how you make a fan of your brand. Most of us are brewing pretty good beer. Some of us are brewing fantastic beer. It's more than the beer that's your brand. So as you bring people in, hiring the right people who live your values, and values that involve how you treat people, how you treat your neighbors, how you exhibit hospitality really make a difference.
I would much rather hire somebody who is hospitality driven and have no knowledge of beer. That's a much easier train.
And Anne, what are your thoughts?
I agree 100%. I mean, I was going to say to Ari, try being a brewery that is completely hop forward, and we, at any given time we'll have 6 IPAs on the list. Being able to explain that to someone and be like, these are actually all very different beers. What do you like? What don't you like? And, again, asking questions and making people feel great about their choices. I remember one time I took an order from a woman and she's like, I'm boring. I'll just have the Pilsner. And I was like, that's not boring. I was like, do you know how hard Pilsners are to make? I was like,
a pro move.
I was like, they take so long to make and there's nowhere to hide a flaw in them. I was like, so liking Pilsners is actually a very sophisticated choice. And she was like, really? And like, she walked away feeling really good about that. And I was like, yeah, like there's not, everybody's had different access to beers. It doesn't, make you better than the rest. Like you're there, you're appreciating something and you're enjoying it. As long as you're enjoying what you're drinking, I'm happy. I don't need you to, have the most sophisticated palate in the world. That's not what it's about. It's about you enjoying what you're having, you having a good experience, you learning something. You get like the number one thing is, I don't like IPAs. It's like, okay, there's a wide world here. As Ari and Sarah Jane said, what flavors do you like? What flavors don't you like? You don't like bitter? Cool. Try this one. This is more fruit forward. And directing people, and suddenly they're like, oh, I do like these things. I do know what I'm talking about. I just am in a different thing. My father always said time and a place for every beer. And that goes for every individual. We don't always like the same things, and that's all right.
I like that part. And I have to say, yes, pills don't lie. For the audience, if you really want to know the talent of a brewery, drink their Pilsner, because any flaw sticks out like a sore thumb. A couple of minutes left. One of the questions out there, and I'll throw this to you, Ari, about change in packaging, and also for you too, Anne, about bottles to cans. I know Maine Brewing Companies is bottles only, but is there any shift do you foresee in packaging?
I'll start with this one. I mean, numbers kind of create an issue where cans are great until there's a can shortage. We definitely threw some conversations around about like, oh my gosh, we go back to bottles. Cans are so expensive right now. But ultimately, beer is a product that responds poorly to direct light and poorly to oxygen. Cans are a package that remove those two barriers to great beer flavor. So by choosing cans, we feel like we made the best choice for our brand by keeping the light and the air out of our beer. Throw in freight when you start talking about distributing out of state, throw in portability. North Carolina is a lifestyle state. Cans are lighter when you throw them in your backpack for a hike. They're allowed at your pool. So a lot of those choices around cans work for us really well. But I definitely recognize other brewers made the same choice for the same reasons. And we were all definitely jockeying with distributors to get cans as the packaging shifted. But, I'm sure Anne can tell you why Maine has chosen to stay in bottles.
Yeah. I mean, I think it always frustrates me when people treat this like a very, light decision, like, oh, just switch. And it's just like, we started in bottles. When our company started, there were very few people producing in cans. I think among craft breweries, it was Dale's and maybe one or two others. So it wasn't really an option. And when, as we developed as a company, we bottle condition almost all of our beers. We find that is really the best for maintaining the quality of a highly hopped beer. So that's something that we continue to do. I know you can condition, but we found bottle and condition is best for the quality of our product. So that's what we're sticking with. But, there are pros and cons to both. A lot of times we get, well, glass isn't as recyclable. And it's like, well, in some places, yes. Mm-hmm. There are really, when you look across the board of aluminum versus glass, I can put a pile in columns for both. We chose what we did, and we, are continuing to stand by it, but also continuing to make decisions that will lessen any impact. It's also, just infrastructure. Even if we wanted to change to cans tomorrow, that would involve, restructuring our entire manufacturing side, all of our packaging, ordering, getting an entire new canning line. These are not inexpensive things to do. But so right now we're sticking with bottles. It's a format we like for our brands. And I think Ari nailed it. It's what a company chooses for their brand and what they feel is right for their product. It's never a bad decision which way you go.
And there's another, just going, since we have a few minutes left, when somebody's asking about larger quantities as grab and go, it'll be interesting to see how the numbers bear out. And if you really want to know beer geek stats, you should follow Bart Watson from the Brewers Association. He puts out a lot of this data on it. There was a shift on where people are buying beer and how they're buying beer, larger quantities. Basically see how that shifts back as more people are comfortable going out. I was one of those individuals. I'd buy a case, wouldn't go out for another couple of weeks, and then buy another case, wouldn't go. Now that things are opening back up, personally for myself, I'm buying smaller quantities. Interesting question. Somebody, I think they're dialing in from abroad, talking about developing countries, sub-Saharan region, increasing production of their beers opposed to importing. I would have to say, and anybody can chime into this, is part of this what we've been talking about, is creating that culture of where you become part of the community. I think a brewery can be successful in a lot of different places. Who would think that you have all these great breweries popping up in the South because they're a part of the community and bringing people along with that story and helping them be a part of it. I lived in a neighborhood in Philadelphia for about a year. Now it's called Brewery Town because that's what it used to be, the brewery part of Philadelphia. But when I lived there, nobody even knew that it existed. Last question, just to wrap things up, technology help you assist you in your tap room. Is there any other types of technology? We talked about QR codes. I know one company that has self-ordering kiosks. It has facial recognition. So not only does it facial recognition, it will recognize your face, tell you what your last order was, and then also make suggestions from there. Yes, I know there's a lot of questions about facial recognition, but that technology does exist. Is there any other technology that you're utilizing or foresee that might be popping up in the future in the beer world? I'll start with you, Sarah Jane.
Well, I mentioned this earlier, but the self-service option, just from, you're reducing waste, it's better for sales, all those little tasters that you're usually passing out, that actually adds up. But if you're doing a self-service, it accounts for all of that. And then we talked about labor shortage. It definitely helps with that as well. So I would feel like there would be more automated self-service options out there. I mean, people are definitely divided in how they feel, but it's bound to expand, I think.
And then now that we're having any other final thoughts as we're starting to close down, Sarah Jane?
No final thoughts. I'm really grateful I got to be a part of this. And I'm really excited to get out to tap rooms and drink more beer.
All right. Any final thoughts?
Well, I just want to thank everyone for their time, and just remember, those dollars you spend in your local craft brewery stay in your community. So shop local.
And Ed, I have one question for you before we wrap up. Why is it important to update websites? One of the things I'm frustrated with is when breweries don't update their websites. Why is that important?
It's so important. And as someone who rapidly updates ours, it's kind of like, I get frustrated when people don't use it. I get a billion questions every day about if a certain beer is available, and I'm like, it's on the website. We update it. I promise, every day. I think it's just keeping your customers informed, and that's how people are finding you and interacting with you before they get to your space. So making sure they have the best information possible is really important.
Your website is your welcome mat.
And that's where we've talked about technology. To me, a simple form of technology is your website. A simple form of increasing sales is your website. A simple way of engaging with your community is your website, because you can post more information than just your beer list. There are several companies that list their traceability when it comes to sustainability and where they're getting the ingredients. And it's inexpensive. Yes, it requires some time, but it's an inexpensive way to engage with everybody. This pretty much wraps up our hour. I would like to thank our panelists for joining us. My final thoughts, and any other final thoughts? Forgot to ask you that.
Just echoing these two, thank everybody for, the support they've shown to their local breweries and tasting rooms. And, we appreciate that so much, especially this past year, and keep it up. Be patient with us. We're all kind of diving back into this together. And, like we said at the start, that some of us are fumbling a little bit because we've been out of practice, but we're getting there, and, we want to have a great summer.
And I highly recommend visiting your local tap room. They're open. They're looking forward to seeing you. Come by yourself, bring friends. If you're still not comfortable going to them, that's okay. Some of them have grab and go. Some of them might be able to buy their products in the local bottle shop. But also continue to work on how to create an environment where everybody feels welcome and everybody can enjoy a simple thing called beer. So thank you for tuning in. If you have any other questions, you can certainly ask those. I also do have, shameless plug, a class through eCornell that talks about beer and different types of beer styles. So you can certainly look that up. And also eCornell, for some of you who might be interested or looking for more information on diversity and quality, there's classes on that, costing, marketing. So there is a host of classes via eCornell that can support your brewery, your tap room, or your operation. Thank you, everybody. I'm over time. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.